Amidst sun-gilded seashore, salt-washed breeze, and the occasional cacophony of seagulls, a weathered old man drags an equally old and worn dory up and onto a lonely rock in the middle of the cove. He's been looking forward to this moment all day, a chance to get away from everyone and everything, to lose himself in the soothing breath of the tide, as well as his stories. These are stories from the rock. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our fifth episode of Stories from the Rock. This episode will be continuing a story that we started before the holiday break. It's called The Shaolin Banshee, and it's one that was extremely fun for me to write. Our main protagonist is Lyra Jacqueline MacLeod, and she is of both Scottish and Chinese ethnicities. She is experiencing the zombie apocalypse right now, and she has not had a good time with a lot of her backstory and the world building that went into the first part. The second part will be continuing where we left off. And while this story might not seem like a nautical themed sort of Newfoundland tale at first glance, what really cinches it is that Squeak, our side character, or perhaps sidekick to Lyra, is a Newfoundlander, and she does us all a little bit proud. Unfortunately, Squeak met her demise at some point in our first part, or at least that's how it seemed, until we ended that story not just with Aang Mua revealing her identity, but also with a hint that maybe Squeak's journey isn't quite over yet. Let's dive in to the second part of the Shaolin Banshee by me, T.C. Bursey. Still reeling from her meltdown and the subsequent power she had awakened, Lyra almost laughed aloud. Frigate, why not? It's far from the weirdest thing about tonight that I'm trying to kill a distant ancestor who just so happens to be both the most famous kung fu master who ever lived and the direct cause of the zombie apocalypse. When did my life become something out of a poorly written graphic novel? Thought Lyra, truly acquiescing to insanity with a giddy grin. Hmm, does my identity amuse you, Lyra? You asked a question, and I gave a truthful answer. Though the bloodline may be heavily watered down, your father is the direct descendant of my own long-dead children. Which reminds me, Engwa purred, rising into the air with a flick of her slippers, gracefully hovering as if held aloft by invisible wires. Lyra snapped her attention to the far northern tree line, where innumerable Jiangshi were causing their ruckus, breaking branches, screaming, moaning, and coming closer. She adopted a defensive stance and let her new power bloom within her mind. Calm yourself, Lyra. I would not send my hard-earned army to die against a newly awakened Wu sorcerer. As much as I hate to admit it, with your newfound power, you would just as likely extinguish them all than they you, and I cannot afford a setback such as that. Not when I am this close to my goals. Lyra was relieved, but tried not to show it. The old woman she had known only as Sifu had often kept information to herself, but she had never once lied to anyone, as far as Lyra knew, and Queen Jiangshi or not, there was little reason to think that she was lying to her now. Stop. Don't think of her as Sifu. Kill her. But not until I give her a taste of the pain she's inflicted upon billions, Lyra thought. And what goals are those? Why do any of this? Why now, after the supposed centuries you've preached non-violence? Sifu ignored Lyra's questions and raised a single slender black-nailed finger skyward, just as she used to when calling for Lyra to be silent, back when they were not just master and apprentice, but something akin to mother and daughter. Li Kai! Sifu suddenly screeched, louder than Lyra was mentally prepared for, startling her into briefly losing grasp of the fiery new ki that stoked within her mind and body. The undead horde went silent for a brief moment until the sounds began anew, shrinking steadily quieter with each deep throb of Lyra's racing pulse. The ground's vibrations dwindled to a hum that whispered against Lyra's feet as Engmua floated down to the forest floor once more. Lyra inhaled deeply and gathered her ki, priming her body and mind for battle. Now then, where were, began the creature, until a sudden dry snap stole her attention. Sifu cocked her head of floaty, wispy black hair to the side and slowly turned around. With equal tentative curiosity, Lyra maneuvered around her former master like a hunting crane, vying to see what was so important as to distract the most powerful being on Earth. When she finally saw her, Lyra's heart tore itself closed, and her eyes widened. "Oh, what's this?" Sifu hissed, seemingly amused as she floated down to stare deep into the girl's mismatched green and yellow eyes. "Did you not hear my command, child? I said..." Scene break. Squeak had calmed herself to a clear head, and put that head to good use. "This is the other side, isn't it? No, some in-between place that the oldest lady turned into a trap for souls. It's dark here, it's cold here, but that makes it so I can see. Me body's eyes sees the living world like looking through a boat's porthole on a foggy day, but the cold and the dark of this place makes it so that me whole spirit acts like one big eyeball. At least, I think that's what's going on. I may not know much, but I knows a friggin' trap when I sees one, and as long as I can see the trap, I can escape the trap," Squeak thought loudly, stark against the nothingness beyond the seemingly infinite web of silvery strings and the ocular window to Lyra's world. "These strings, the one in me chest acts as an anchor, and the smaller threads throughout me body that are like the lines of a marionette. I can see 'em clearly now. It's knots. It's all just basic boat knots like father taught me. The one that holds me to the oldest lady is a bowline," Squeak concluded, with a ghost of a smile, grasping the silvery wire of spun key that tugged and yanked within her core. "And that end's basically just a cleat hitch. Like any cleat, I could whip the line to and fro until it falls away, but only if the line was slack enough to do it. It's the tension that keeps a cleat strong, so the more the soul on the other end struggles, the tighter they make the knot. That means I just need to do the opposite, and I'll have the slack I need to untie it." But slack was much easier wanted than obtained. Aside from the main line of key that anchored Squeak to Engmu, there was also an untold number of smaller threads that held Squeak tightly in place unless otherwise propelled by her captor. Squeak understood that this was also the mechanics behind how the oldest lady controlled her undead body in Lyra's living world. But without the ability to move on her own, there wasn't a way to create any slack in her main line. She was about to lose hope when Squeak's keen sense of spiritual sight noticed something else. "Wait, the silver wires she controls me with, how she gets me to move and talk and stay still. They're clove hitches. They would have to be, or else the lines would all tangle up. And if they're clove hitches, then that means they can slide around. If they can slide around, they can be adjusted. And if they can be adjusted, Yes, that can work. All I needs now is a moment where the oldest lady is distracted so she doesn't pull me somewhere else and interrupt me work. So Squeak waited for her chance to work at her bindings, being pulled this way and that the whole time. The oldest lady had made her kick a big hole into Lyra's side during that time, and Squeak screamed a silent apology at Lyra in the aftermath of the devastating blow. Before long, her moment of control finally came in the form of Lyra's mind-blowing release of black and white energy that nearly destroyed the oldest lady in the spans of a few seconds. There was even a slight palpable slackening to her lines in the wake of Lyra's keening that hammered home the moment as Squeak's perfect chance to escape. This is it! Inhaling nothing at all, Squeak focused her attention on the spirit's right arm, and after a few tentative tugs, she identified the angle that allowed her to slide the thread parallel with little resistance. I friggin' knew it! Squeak happily continued to test the threads, little by little, until she managed to slide each and every string that controlled her body into the slackest point possible for each. By the end, Squeak had accumulated enough slack in her lines to have roughly 1 square foot of free movement. Then, Squeak felt something else. It was as if a sudden, impossible cold had lanced through her. Her mind slowed to a near crawl. She felt as if she were somehow being drained of something as precious and vital as blood, but from deep within her mind and spirit. Squeak's instinct screamed at her that she was indeed being eaten by the spider of this massive web, siphoning energy from countless snared souls. She could feel their agony now in the wake of that cold. She could feel her mother, her father, the one who feels a lot like Lyra, and having their life force sucked away in order for the spider to heal its savage wounds. No, I was so close. Stay awake, stay strong, stay. Just as her mind began to flicker away, Squeak felt renewed energy course into her like a warm breeze. Surprised and oddly curious, she let her awareness follow the thread of gifted energy to its source, and found her. It was like looking into a mirror to a parallel dimension. You looks just like me, Squeak told the girl. Your eyes is like Lyra's instead of mine, but aside from... No time for that, the girl who was not Squeak managed to tell her, seemingly exhausted. Don't let your chance slip away. You have to help Lyra. You have to end this. How do you know Lyra? Squeak asked with her mind, before the same trickle of energy became an all-consuming flood coming from 1,000 different directions, severing Squeak's connection to her ethereal doppelganger and forcing her mind to its moorings. Feeling oddly renewed, Squeak tightened her spirit's fist to test her strength, and found it bubbling like a radiant hot spring amidst their in-between world of cold and darkness. Hurry! Squeak commanded of herself as she grabbed the bowline in her chest and jostled it. Scene break. Angmua was still glaring at Squeak, their faces just inches away from touching, until Squeak smiled and took 3 steps backward. Sifu hissed in a short burst of sound. Tss! Impossible! Lyra watched gobsmacked as the Queen Jiangshi rushed forward to kill the girl, only to suddenly stop, with her sharp fingernails halted mere millimeters from Squeak's mismatched smiling eyes. What is this? Angmua demanded of the girl, before witnessing her dissolve away amidst black ribbons of spun yin ki. Get back here! Obey me! Sifu moved to deliver a death blow once again, but once more was stopped short, tugging and pulling as if caught by invisible strings. Lyra let out a gentle chuckle at the sheer cheekiness of what was happening. And with that in mind, what was happening truly sank in. Squeak, is that you? Is that truly you? She called to the girl, a sad hope rising from her heart to water her eyes. In response, Squeak smirked in Lyra's direction and cocked her head to the side while winking her yellow eye. Emma says hi. Over and over, Angmua screeched and lunged at Squeak, at times nearly catching her in her grasp for what seemed almost minutes. Each time, Squeak deftly dodged, feinted, parried, skittered away with inhuman speed and accuracy until the monster known as Angmua began moving only in shuddering spurts and sputters. Finally, the Queen Jiangshi stopped, hunched, contorted, gnarled, and in rigid place atop the same splintered oak stump where Lyra had first struck at her target. All the while, the Queen Jiangshi screamed in almost juvenile tantrum-like rage. This can't be! How? I am the most powerful being alive. I was to bring about true peace. I was to restore balance. For centuries I watched while humankind destroyed this beautiful world of nature that I loved. I waited a century more to gather my plan to take it all back. I worked tirelessly toward this. I straddled the forbidden liminal spaces between yin and yang. I became a master Wu sorcerer, a master of Wing Chun Kung Fu, an immortal master of the entire blood-soaked world. I am Ingmur of the Shaolin, Sifu ranted, spittle flying from perfectly ruby lips and ivory fangs. Squeak appeared as if from the thin darkness of the night itself, just 2 feet away from her former captor. The tables turned. She sighed casually and crouched down to stare into the eyes of the spider she had trapped in its own web. You might be the master of all that and more besides, Angmo of the Shaolin, but the master of traps is Andrea Pipsqueak Murphy of the Newfoundlanders, squeaked Squeak, before flicking Ingmo's forehead with her right middle finger. And don't you friggin' forget it either, you dirty old bag. And with that, Angmua screamed and thrashed and thundered and shrieked. Squeak giggled as she turned, flipping her head of pale blonde hair, and sauntered over, half skipping, toward a grinning Lyra. She's all yours, the girl said simply as she walked straight past the Banshee to lean nonchalantly against the same towering oak that Lyra had previously stranded her in. Though she wanted nothing more than to scoop Squeak into her arms and a subsequent bone-crushing hug of joy, affection, and bewilderment, Lyra instead threw gasoline onto the fire of her rage and turned her attention toward her target. She inhaled a deep breath and strode forward, her face the expressionless mask of an executioner. Lyra, think about what you're doing. We can come to some sort of agreement. We do not have to exist as adversaries. We were family once. We can be a family again. Shut up. Lyra, you saw how the girl was brought back. I can bring Emma back the same way. Don't say her name. Lyra, you simply will listen to me. I am your Sifu. I have no Sifu. She was within casual striking distance now. Lyra, please. I don't want to die. First things first. The creature cringed and flinched, preparing for a fatal blow. But Lyra did not use her claws. She didn't use her gloves at all. Instead, the Banshee placed a naked thumb just above the bridge of Angmua's slender nose and twisted as if turning a key. An impossible, almost palpable silence, and then, ah, 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 Lyra resisted the urge to cover her ears against the splitting cries issuing from the foaming mouth of her former master. How? The creature inquired between gasps of pain. I have no wounds. How can I be in this much pain? Lyra laughed before answering, shaking her head. Foolish former master, you said yourself that you haven't felt pain in centuries. Even having feeling is going to be an unwelcome discomfort after all that time. Besides, haven't you ever had your leg fall asleep? That's essentially what you did to your entire body by closing off the meridian lines the same way as one might close off circulation. When a leg is asleep, at first it's numb, but once the feeling returns, ah! Screamed Angmua once more in harrowing agony, nearly matching the same monstrous volume as Lyra's keening. Lyra grinned wolfishly. Hurts, doesn't it? I told you that you would feel pain. Agony is good luck for you, Sifu. It's too bad it can't last much longer. Through her sputtering and futile flailing, caught in her own web in the throes of pain and mortal terror, Angmua turned an ironic and well-deserved tearful gaze upward at Lyra. What are you going to do to me? Lyra raised an eyebrow. Me? I've already done all I need to do. All that I said I would do. The question you should be asking right now is what are they going to do to you? Sifu looked puzzled, and then stricken by inhuman dread. You cannot mean... From the northern shadows, the combined screaming of hundreds of Jiangshi began anew, frantic, confused, and free. You see, dear umpteen times great whatever, I didn't just unlock your pain, I unlocked it all. A full factory reset, so to speak. I took away your ability to manipulate ki altogether, along with every mindless Jiangshi that was under your control. Squeak was still freshly turned and appears to have escaped on her own. Pfft, scoffed Squeak from behind her. Understatement of the century, though the others did lend me some strength to get her done, so they did. And so her mind is still intact, along with the powers she gained as a yin Jiangshi. But the others, they're too far gone to be saved. Their bodies are rotted, their spirits scrambled and driven to madness, but they're still free. And like any wild beast newly freed from captivity, what's the first thing they will do? The first of the vengeful Jiangshi emerged from the northern tree line, its jaw hanging from a loose tangle of skin and facial hair as it warbled, flexing and closing its long-nailed fist, as if testing its own free will for the first time. It looked at Sifu and hissed. The second emerged, bloating and near bursting out of its ripped tank top and jeans from the buildup of rotten gases. Then a third and a fourth, until the northern tree line itself resembled a motley battalion of musketmen staring down an enemy line. Sifu panted frantically and once more gazed up at Lyra, her eyes pleading. Lyra stared back. They're going to tear you apart, piece by piece, handful by handful, mouthful by mouthful, until all that remains of you is gnawed bones and the stink of your own forced out piss. I don't know what your justification was for all this, and before you go off on another one of your exhausted rants, I don't rightly care to know. Either way, it's all over now. Lyra turned and began to walk away. Ah, no! Lyra! Lyra, please, come back. Don't leave me like this. Not like this. Please, Sifu begged. Lyra paused for a moment and turned back. Oh, oh, Lyra, thank you. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't be so cruel as this. You were always such a sweet and honorable. I forgot this. Lyra seized her former master by the scruff of her robes, leaned back hard, and headbutt Engmua not once, not twice, but 3 times in powerful, quick succession, shattering Engmua's slender nose to bloody sunders. Welcome to Scotland! Lyra wiped the blood from her forehead and returned her attention to the south, walking briskly. As the Banshee's former master dissolved into a series of blood-curdling screeches, almost unintelligible Chinese curses, and the wet, squelching sounds of flesh being torn from bone, Lyra briefly paused in her tracks again, when she took a single step past the tree where Squeak was still leaning, watching the gory show with childhood fascination. Sighing in acquiescence, she finally did stop. Well, Lyra chastened, are ye coming or not? Squeak leaned outward from her tree and greased a grin before placing both her hands behind her head and sauntering up to Lyra's side, almost skipping. So, I guess this means that I'm your sidekick now. Get it? Sidekick? Teased Squeak, jabbing at the large dent she had previously kicked into the armor over Lyra's ribcage. I changed my mind. Go away, Lyra said. Oh, come on. I have powers now, and I'm going to need someone to train me. Go away. Oh, me friggin' God, I'm going to need a cool name. Squeak is fine. How about Lil Banshee? No. Leprechaun? They're tricksters, and that's me to a T. Do I get wishes if I put ye in a cage? Pfft, there's not a cage on earth that can hold Andrea Pipsqueak Murphy, master of traps. Let's find out if you can escape a headlock. You gotta catch me first, old lady. And that is the conclusion of Lyra and Squeak and their story, the Shaolin Banshee. It's a story that, again, like I mentioned last episode, was one that I started on Writing Battle, which is an awesome platform for new and experienced writers to get into. It could even be an asset in your writing career. Just make sure to have some fun while you're at it. Writing, like any art, should primarily be a form of play, and the work should come after, not the other way around. Otherwise, it can be pretty soul-sucking. A lot like a soul-sucking vampire, like Engmu. Thanks for tuning in. Join us next Friday for more stories from The Rock.